The sky above Vexar Prime burned, not with the natural orange glow of their twin suns setting beyond the crystalline mountains, but with the artificial fire of orbital bombardment. Each impact sent shockwaves rippling through the planet's crust, felt even 300 meters below the surface, where Ambassador Krell stood in the emergency command bunker. The tactical displays told a story of systematic annihilation. 7 days ago, the Dominion Empire had arrived with a fleet of 200 warships. The Vexari Defense Forces, pride of their republic, had lasted exactly 43 minutes. Krell's four eyes tracked the data streams flowing across the holographic projections. His people were a reptilian species, their scales typically vibrant, with emerald and bronze hues that marked health and vitality. But stress had dulled everyone's coloration to a sickly gray. The bunker's artificial lighting made them all look like ghosts of themselves. Commander Zelk approached, his movements heavy with exhaustion. The military officer hadn't slept in 7 days. None of them had, not really. Just brief collapses into unconsciousness before the next crisis yanked them back to wakefulness. Ambassador, we've lost contact with the northern continent. Zelk's voice carried the flat affect of someone who had reported too many disasters, felt too much grief to process anymore. The Dominion has deployed their atmospheric processors. They're converting our air to their preferred mixture. Krell closed all four eyes, a gesture of deep mourning among his people. The atmospheric processors meant the Dominion intended to stay. Within months, the Vexari would need breathing apparatus on their own world. Within a year, any resistance would be impossible, as their very atmosphere became hostile to their biology. Above them, another kinetic strike hit close enough to shake dust from the reinforced ceiling. Junior officers scrambled to check structural integrity readings. The boring machines were getting closer. Always closer. The atmospheric processors are at 23% conversion, Zelk continued, consulting his datapad. 8 million civilians are in the underground shelters. The boring machines will breach the first shelter networks in approximately 72 hours. 72 hours, 3 days until the slaughter of innocents would begin in earnest. Krell turned to the communication console, where a growing list of rejected aid requests glowed like accusations. Each name represented a supposed ally, a trading partner, a member of the Galactic Accord who had sworn mutual defense. Each rejection felt like watching another door close on their survival. Any word from the Celestial Union? Krell asked, though he already knew the answer. He had to ask, had to try. They cite the non-aggression pact they signed with the Dominion last cycle, Zelk replied. The Athetherans claim their fleet is engaged in peacekeeping operations in the Outer Rim. The Quellans? Zelk's disgust was evident in the way his scales rippled. The Quellans are already negotiating trade agreements with the Dominion for after our fall. After our fall, not if. After. As if the Vexari Republic's destruction was already written into the historical record, just waiting to be filed away. Another explosion, this one powerful enough to make the tactical displays flicker. Warning klaxons briefly wailed before being silenced by frantic technicians. Somewhere in the bunker's deep infrastructure, something had failed. They were running out of time, and everyone knew it. There must be someone, Krell muttered, his clawed fingers scrolling through the database of known spacefaring civilizations. Most were either too distant to help, too weak to matter, or already under some form of Dominion influence. The Empire had spent decades building their power base through intimidation and strategic alliances. Fighting them meant facing not just their fleets, but the political isolation they could enforce. Then a name caught his attention, buried deep in the archived contact lists, filed under civilizations considered too primitive or too isolated to warrant regular diplomatic exchange. Earth, the humans. Krell had heard stories about them, mostly from traders who'd ventured into their space seeking exotic goods in new markets. They were a young species by galactic standards, barely 2 centuries into faster-than-light travel. Newcomers, children playing at interstellar politics. But the stories were something else entirely. Humans had fought 3 major interstellar wars in their short time among the stars, and they'd won all 3. Not through superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but through sheer stubborn refusal to surrender. They'd once sent a fleet of mining vessels armed with improvised weapons to defend a colony world and somehow won against a professional military force. They'd turned their own sun into a weapon to repel invaders, risking their homeworld in the process. They were, by all accounts, completely insane by civilized standards. Sir, Zelk noticed Krell staring at the screen, you're not seriously considering the humans. They have no treaties with the Dominion, Krell said slowly, his mind working through the implications. No trade agreements to protect, no political capital to lose. They're isolated from galactic politics by choice. Because they're unhinged, Zelk protested. Sir, there are documented cases of human ships ramming enemy vessels when they ran out of ammunition. They treat war like some kind of competitive sport. Their military doctrine includes something they call acceptable losses that would horrify any civilized species. Another explosion rocked the bunker closer this time. On the tactical display, Krell could see Dominion boring machines beginning their descent toward the shelter network. Massive drills that could chew through solid rock, bringing death to the millions huddled in the darkness below. 8 hours, maybe less. Unhinged might be exactly what we need, Krell said, initiating the communication protocol. His claws moved across the holographic interface with a certainty he didn't feel. What do we have to lose, Commander? If they ignore us, we're no worse off than we are now. And if they send help, Zelk asked quietly, then perhaps we die in an even more spectacular fashion, Krell acknowledged. But at least we die fighting back. The quantum entanglement communicator took several minutes to establish a connection across the vast distance to Earth's territory. The technology was expensive, reserved for the most critical communications. Krell watched the progress indicator climb, each percentage point feeling like an eternity. When the screen finally activated, Krell found himself looking at a human male with short gray hair and weathered features. The human wore a black uniform with minimal decoration, and behind him was what appeared to be a strategic command center. Officers moved with purposeful efficiency in the background. "This is Admiral William Dalton, Earth Defense Coalition," the human said in accented but clear galactic standard. His voice was deep, carrying the weight of authority. "We're receiving you, unknown caller. State your business." Krell straightened, trying to project dignity despite their desperate situation. Despite the dust on his scales and the exhaustion that made his limbs tremble. "Admiral Dalton, I am Ambassador Krell of the Vexery Republic. Our homeworld is under attack by the Dominion Empire. Our defenses have fallen, and our population faces extermination or enslavement. We formally request immediate military aid from Earth." The human's expression didn't change, but Krell noticed him gesture to someone off-screen. A brief exchange of words in the human language, too fast and quiet for the translator to catch. "Ambassador, I'm showing your location as the Vexar system, approximately 47 light-years from our nearest outpost. Can you confirm?" "Confirmed, Admiral." Krell felt hope and despair warring in his chest. 47 light-years. Even with advanced FTL drives, that was weeks of travel time. They had hours. "Admiral, I know our species have had minimal contact. We have no formal treaties, no trade agreements, nothing to offer you in this moment except our gratitude. But we're desperate." His voice cracked slightly, the professional diplomat's facade crumbling under the weight of what he was about to say. "The Dominion is deploying atmospheric processors to make our world uninhabitable to us. We have 8 million civilians in shelters that will be breached within hours. We need—" He paused, struggling with the admission of helplessness. "Send us anything. We're getting slaughtered." Admiral Dalton was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying something off-screen. Krell could hear muffled voices in the background, what sounded like a heated discussion. The human officer held up one hand, apparently listening to someone through an earpiece. Then Dalton's expression shifted. Something that might have been a smile touched the corners of his mouth, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Ambassador Krell, I'm going to transfer you to someone who can help. Stand by." The screen flickered, and for a heart-stopping moment, Krell thought the connection had been lost. Then a new face appeared. A human female, perhaps in her mid-50s, with steel-gray hair cut military short. Sharp features that spoke of both intelligence and hard-won experience. Eyes the color of winter storms. She wore the same black uniform as Dalton, but there was something different about the way she carried herself. A coiled intensity, like a predator deciding whether to strike. "Ambassador Krell, the woman said. Her voice was quieter than Dalton's, but somehow more commanding. I'm Admiral Catherine Brennan. They call me Cat. I commanded strike operations during the Gulf War in 1991. I know what it's like to watch innocent civilians die while politicians debate response times. She leaned forward slightly, those winter storm eyes locked on Krell. I also know what it's like to be shot down over enemy territory and wait 72 hours for rescue, wondering if anyone's coming. So I'm going to be direct with you. The Dominion Empire has been on our watch list for some time. They've been testing our borders, probing our defenses, studying our response patterns. We've been expecting them to make a major move. Krell felt his heart sink. She was going to refuse. They all refused. The same political calculations, the same risk assessments, the same... We thought they'd come for us directly, Brennan continued, but they attacked you first. That tells me something about their strategy, about their methods, about their willingness to commit genocide against species they consider beneath them. The Admiral's expression hardened, and Krell saw something flash in those eyes, something that made him understand viscerally why other species found humans unsettling. Earth has a saying, Ambassador. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. The Dominion made a mistake attacking you first. It shows their hand, and we don't take kindly to bullies. We especially don't like genocidal empires operating in our stellar neighborhood. Then you'll help us? Krell could barely believe what he was hearing. Admiral, I must warn you, the Dominion has over 200 ships in our system. Their technology is advanced. Their shields are nearly impenetrable by conventional weapons. Brennan's smile widened, revealing an expression that sent a primal chill down Krell's spine. Not cruelty exactly, but absolute confidence, backed by devastating capability. Ambassador, you asked us to send anything. You didn't specify size limitations. She turned to someone off-screen. Signal to Prometheus. Full combat loadout. Operation Thunderstrike is now active. She looked back at Krell, and her voice carried steel underneath the calm. The Prometheus isn't just anything, Ambassador. She's everything. 2.3 kilometers of human engineering armed with weapons that violate at least 15 Galactic Accord treaties that we never signed in the first place. Krell's translator struggled briefly with the specifications. 2.3 kilometers. That was impossible. No species built warships that large. The power requirements alone would be prohibitive. The structural integrity issues. The cost. Admiral, Zelk interjected from beside Krell, unable to contain himself. That's impossible. A ship that size would take weeks to travel 47 light-years, even with the most advanced FTL systems known to the Accord. Brennan's eyes shifted to Zelk, and her voice grew colder, more precise. Would take weeks with standard FTL, Commander. Humans don't do standard. She checked something on a display off-screen. We'll be there in 18 hours. Try to stay alive until then, Ambassador Thor. Things are about to get very interesting. The communication ended, leaving Krell and his staff staring at the blank screen in stunned silence. 18 hours. The journey should take 3 weeks minimum with the fastest known FTL drives. It was impossible. Above them, the Dominion continued their relentless assault, boring machines grinding ever closer to the civilian shelters. Atmospheric processors slowly poisoning the air. Death approaching with methodical certainty. But for the first time in 7 days, Krell felt something other than despair rising in his chest. He wasn't sure if it was hope or terror or some strange combination of both. Sir, one of the junior officers called out, incoming transmission from the surface, Dominion Command. Put it through, Krell ordered. The screen flickered to life, showing a Dominion officer. The species was vaguely humanoid but taller, with skin that ranged from deep purple to midnight black. This one, clearly high-ranking, based on the ornate armor, had metallic eyes that gleamed like polished silver. Vexari leadership, the Dominion officer said, his voice carrying the careful pronunciation of someone speaking a conquered language. I am Commander Vrax of the Dominion Third Fleet. I'm transmitting to inform you that we are broadcasting footage of our conquest to the wider galactic community. Your fall will serve as an example to others who might consider resisting the natural order. Vrax gestured, and a secondary screen appeared, showing footage of Dominion forces systematically destroying Vexery installations, cities burning, defensive positions being overrun. We have crushed 217 worlds, Vrax continued. Yours will be 218. This is not personal, Ambassador. This is simply the way of things. The strong serene, the weak are absorbed. I offer you one final chance to surrender with dignity. Your people will be relocated to labor worlds, but they will live. Krell looked at the footage, at the destruction of everything his people had built over millennia. Then he thought about Admiral Brennan's expression, about a species crazy enough to build a 2-kilometer warship, about humans ramming enemy vessels when they ran out of ammunition. Commander Vrax, Krell said slowly, I appreciate the offer, but I'm afraid I must decline. Vrax's metallic eyes narrowed. You condemn your people to extinction. Perhaps, Krell acknowledged, or perhaps I've just called in reinforcements you can't imagine. You have 18 hours to enjoy your victory, Commander. I suggest you make the most of them. He cut the transmission before Vrax could respond. Zelk stared at him. Sir, was that wise? If the humans don't come, then we die as we would have anyway, Krell said. But if they do come, he trailed off, looking at the countdown timer he'd started on the tactical display. 18 hours. If they do come, Commander Vrax is going to learn that there are things in this galaxy more terrifying than the Dominion Empire. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. The Dominion continued their assault, methodical and unstoppable. The atmospheric conversion reached 31%. Boring machines advanced another kilometer toward the shelters. The Vexari fighters who remained on the surface were hunted down and eliminated with surgical precision. Krell found himself checking the countdown obsessively. 17 hours, 16, 15. Zelk approached with a grim update. The first shelter breach is now projected in 8 hours. The Dominion has accelerated their drilling operations. They want to finish before the humans arrive, Krell realized. They know we called for help. Or they're simply being efficient, Zelk countered. Sir, what if the humans can't make it in time? What if this Admiral Brennan overestimated their capabilities? Krell didn't have an answer for that. He could only watch the countdown and hope. 14 hours, 13, 12. Reports came in from the surface. Dominion forces were setting up what looked like ceremonial grounds near the capital city's ruins. They were preparing to broadcast the final conquest, the moment when the boring machines broke through and the slaughter began. Propaganda for the galaxy to witness. 11 hours, 10, 9. The atmospheric conversion hit 42%. Vexery on the surface, who didn't have breathing apparatus, were beginning to suffocate. The few resistance fighters who remained were forced to retreat deeper underground or die gasping in air that no longer supported their biology. 8 hours, 7, 6. The boring machines were now close enough that those in the deepest shelters could hear them. A distant grinding, felt more than heard, vibrating through the rock itself. Parents held children close. The elderly said prayers to gods that seemed to have abandoned them. 5 hours, 4, 3. Krell stood in the command bunker, surrounded by his exhausted staff, watching the tactical display. The Dominion fleet remained in perfect formation around Vexar Prime. 200 ships representing overwhelming force, unstoppable power, inevitable victory. 2 hours, 1 hour, 30 minutes. Sir, the sensor officer called out, his voice cracking with something between hope and hysteria. Sir, I'm detecting something. A massive gravitational distortion. Approaching at, this can't be right. The speed is impossible. Krell felt his heart racing. Show me. The tactical display zoomed out, showing the wider system. And there, at the edge of sensor range, was a reading that defied everything Krell knew about physics. Mass readings are off the scale, the sensor officer reported, his scales beginning to regain some of their natural color. Whatever this is, it's over 2 kilometers in length. And it's moving faster than anything I've ever seen. On the screen, at the edge of the Dominion formation, Krell could see their fleet beginning to react. Ships breaking formation slightly, sensor arrays all turning toward the approaching anomaly. 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, and then space itself screamed. The tear in reality was visible, even to the naked eye, a writhing wound in the fabric of the universe that sparked with energies that shouldn't exist. It appeared 300,000 kilometers from the Dominion fleet's position, a gash in space-time that made every sensor in the Vexari command bunker scream warnings. Through that impossible wound, something emerged. The UES Prometheus came through like an ancient god of war taking physical form. At 2.3 kilometers long and nearly half a kilometer wide, it dwarfed every ship in the Dominion fleet. Its hull wasn't smooth and elegant like most spacefaring vessels. Instead, it was a brutal architecture of angular armor plating, weapon emplacements, and defensive systems that gave it the appearance of a flying fortress. This wasn't a ship built for exploration or trade or diplomacy. This was a weapon, pure and simple. In the command bunker, absolute silence fell as every Vexari stared at the tactical display in shock. "By the ancestors," Zelk whispered. "It's not a ship. It's a mobile battle station." On the display, they could see the Dominion fleet's reaction. Ships that had been in relaxed formation suddenly tightening up, weapons charging, shields strengthening. The methodical confidence of the past 7 days evaporating in the face of something they clearly hadn't anticipated. Krell's communication console chimed, a priority signal. He activated it with trembling claws. Admiral Catherine Brennan appeared on the screen. She was standing on what could only be the Prometheus's bridge, a massive command center with displays showing tactical information and ship status. Behind her, human officers moved with practiced efficiency. "Ambassador Krell," Brennan said, and her voice carried absolute certainty. "This is the UES Prometheus. We have arrived. Please transmit coordinates for all Dominion atmospheric processors and boring machine locations. We'll handle the rest." "Admiral," Krell managed to say, his voice hoarse with emotion he couldn't contain. How did you get here so fast?" Brennan's expression remained steady, professional. "We took a shortcut through hell, Ambassador. Now those coordinates. We have 8 million civilians to save and a genocidal empire to introduce to the concept of consequences." As Krell transmitted the requested data, he watched the tactical display. The Prometheus hung in space like a dark promise. Around it, hundreds of smaller craft were already launching from bay doors along its hull. Automated weapon platforms, each one bristling with ordnance. The Dominion fleet, 200 strong, began to maneuver into attack formation. And Admiral Catherine Brennan, veteran of the Gulf War, survivor of 72 hours in enemy territory, commander of humanity's answer to the question of how to fight impossible odds, gave her first order. "All weapon systems, prepare to fire. Primary targets are the atmospheric processors. Show them what happens when they threaten innocent civilians. Show them what happens when they make Earth angry." The battle for Vexar Prime was about to begin, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Prometheus hung in the void like a monument to human audacity. From the Vexari command bunker 300 meters beneath Vexar Prime's scorched surface, Ambassador Krell watched the tactical display with a mixture of awe and primal fear. The human warship was so massive that it distorted the sensor readings around it, creating gravitational eddies in space itself. On the Dominion flagship Inexorable Might, Commander Vrax stood frozen on his command deck, staring at the impossible vessel that had just torn through reality to arrive in his conquest zone. His metallic eyes tracked the readings streaming across his displays, each one more alarming than the last. "What is that?" he demanded, his forearms gesturing at the tactical projection. "No species builds warships that large. It's impractical, inefficient. The power requirements alone would bankrupt a stellar economy." His sensor officer, a younger Dominion with violet-tinged skin, worked frantically at his station. "Commander, the mass readings they must be malfunctioning. The vessel is showing over 2 kilometers in length, hull composition unknown, energy signatures off the scale." "Impossible," Vrax snarled. But even as he said it, he knew it was true. The humans had built something that violated every principle of efficient starship design. Something that shouldn't exist. His words died as he watched 300 smaller craft launch from bay doors along the Prometheus's hull. These weren't fighters in any conventional sense. They were automated weapon platforms, each one maneuvering with precision that suggested advanced AI control. "All ships," Vrax commanded, forcing confidence into his voice that he didn't feel. "Formation Delta 7, concentrate fire on that monstrosity. If we can overwhelm their shields before they fully deploy, he never finished the sentence. The Prometheus wasted no time on dramatic announcements or demands for surrender. The automated platforms immediately began targeting Dominion ships with mechanical precision. But more significantly, the main vessel's weapon systems locked onto targets that made Vrax's blood run cold. Not his ships, the atmospheric processors. 23 installation sites scattered across Vexar Prime's surface, each one methodically converting the planet's atmosphere to the Dominion's preferred mixture. Each one a strategic asset that had cost significant resources to deploy. Each one now targeted by weapons that Vrax's sensors struggled to classify. "Target lock detected," his tactical officer shouted. "They're ignoring our fleet. They're targeting the processors." Aboard the Prometheus, Admiral Catherine Brennan stood on the bridge with her hands clasped behind her back, watching the tactical displays with clinical detachment. Around her, the command crew worked with the practiced efficiency of a team that had drilled together for years. "Ma'am," her weapons officer reported, "main batteries charged, atmospheric processors targeted, awaiting your command." Captain Ezra Sullivan stood at his station to Brennan's right. At 68 years old, he was the oldest person on the bridge and the only one who fully understood the weapon systems he'd helped design 3 decades ago. His weathered hands moved across the holographic controls with steady precision. "Admiral," Sullivan said quietly, "the processors are relatively soft targets. We can take them out with standard particle beams. Save the heavier ordnance for the fleet." Brennan nodded once. "Agreed. Fire when ready, Captain. And signal all Reaper squadrons. I want them ready to launch the moment we engage the Dominion directly." "Aye, ma'am." The Prometheus's main guns weren't the massive Nova cannon that ran the length of the ship. Those were smaller weapons, relatively speaking, mounted along the vessel's flanks. But smaller was a relative term when discussing human weapons engineering. 23 particle beam emitters locked onto their targets. 23 atmospheric processors that had been slowly poisoning an entire world. 23 installations that represented the Dominion's intention to stay, to conquer, to erase the Vexari from their own planet. Sullivan's fingers moved across the firing control. "Targets locked. Firing." The beams were invisible in the vacuum of space, but their effects were immediate and catastrophic. Each processor simply ceased to exist, vaporized at the molecular level by concentrated streams of accelerated particles moving at relativistic speeds. The installations didn't explode. They didn't collapse. They simply weren't there anymore, replaced by rapidly expanding clouds of ionized gas. In the Vexari command bunker, alarms suddenly shifted from warning klaxons to confused chirps as sensors detected the atmospheric processors going offline. Not damaged, not destroyed in any conventional sense. Simply erased from existence. "What just happened?" Zelk demanded, staring at his displays. "The human ship," Krell breathed, his 4 eyes wide. "They eliminated all 23 processors simultaneously, in less than 3 seconds. But that's impossible. Each processor has shielding rated to withstand orbital bombardment. The Dominion spent weeks installing them." "The humans don't seem concerned with what's possible, Commander." On Vexar Prime's surface, in the shelters where 8 million Vexari huddled in darkness, the change was immediate. The air, which had been growing steadily more toxic, suddenly stopped deteriorating. Parents clutching children felt hope surge for the first time in 7 days. The elderly stopped their prayers of farewell and began prayers of gratitude instead. But the Prometheus wasn't finished. "Dominion fleet is maneuvering," the tactical officer reported, 200 ships forming the TAC formation. "They're preparing to concentrate fire on our position." Brennan's expression didn't change. She'd expected this. The Dominion hadn't built an empire spanning 200 worlds by being cowards or fools. They would fight back with everything they had. "Raise dimensional shields to full strength," she ordered, "and launch Reaper squadrons. All 300 birds. Let's show them what human pilots can do." "Aye, ma'am," launching Reapers. Along the Prometheus's underbelly, massive bay doors irised open. From the darkness of the launch bays, 300 attack craft streamed into space like angry hornets from a disturbed nest. The Reaper-class fighters were sleek, deadly machines designed for one purpose: close-quarters combat in 3-dimensional space. But calling them fighters was like calling a great white shark a fish. Technically accurate, but missing the essential predatory nature. Each Reaper was piloted by a human who had been selected for their ability to think in three-dimensional combat while pulling G-forces that would liquefy most species. They'd been trained in simulators that recreated combat scenarios so brutal that the graduation rate hovered around 30%. The ones who made it through weren't just pilots, they were artists of controlled violence. Lieutenant Rebecca Whitmore, 24 years old and fresh from her first deep space deployment, sat in her Reaper's cockpit and felt her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd trained for this, spent 3 years in the simulators and another year in live exercises. But this was different. This was real combat against a genocidal empire that had crushed 200 worlds. Reaper Squadron 7, this is Command. Admiral Brennan's voice came through her headset, calm and steady. Your primary objective is to screen the Prometheus during main weapon deployment. Secondary objective is to eliminate Dominion boring machines approaching civilian shelters. Tertiary objective is to cause as much chaos in their formation as possible. Understood, Command, Lieutenant Whitmore replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Reaper 7 acknowledging. Around her, the other 24 members of her squadron formed up, their fighters moving with the precision of a dance troupe. Ahead, the Dominion fleet loomed like a wall of death. 200 warships, each one larger than her Reaper, each one armed with weapons that could atomize her fighter with a single direct hit. She thought about the briefing she'd received before departure, about the 8 million Vexari civilians waiting to die, about the atmospheric processors that had been poisoning an entire world, about Admiral Brennan's final words before the launch. Remember why we're here. We're not fighting for conquest or resources. We're fighting because someone asked for help and nobody else would answer. Reaper 7, she transmitted to her squadron, form up on me. Let's introduce these bastards to human ingenuity. The Dominion fleet opened fire first. 200 warships unleashed a simultaneous barrage that should have been enough to vaporize any vessel in known space. Energy beams, plasma torpedoes, kinetic projectiles moving at significant fractions of light speed, all converging on the Prometheus in a display of firepower that lit up the void like a small star. The space around the Prometheus erupted with light and energy, enough destructive force to crack a planet's crust, enough heat to vaporize asteroids, enough violence to make the very fabric of space-time shudder. And it did absolutely nothing. The Prometheus's shields weren't conventional energy barriers that could be overwhelmed or penetrated. They were something else entirely. Something that human scientists had developed through research that other species considered both brilliant and insane in equal measure. Dimensional folding technology that created a pocket of altered space-time around the vessel. The Dominion's weapons hit the shields and simply stopped existing in local space. The attacks were shunted into subspace, their energy dispersed across dimensions that couldn't interact with conventional matter. From an outside perspective, it looked like the barrage simply vanished a kilometer from the Prometheus's hull, absorbed into nothing. On the inexorable might, Vrax stared at his displays in disbelief. Report! What just happened? His sensor officer's voice was shaking. Commander, their shields? They're not energy-based. We're reading dimensional distortion. They're folding space itself. Our weapons are being redirected into subspace before they can reach the hull. That's not possible, Vrax said, but it was becoming a hollow refrain. No species has mastered dimensional technology to that degree. The energy requirements would be astronomical. They have 3 fusion reactors, sir, each one outputting more power than our entire fleet combined. Vrax felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of military service, not since his first combat mission as a young officer. Something cold and primal that settled in his chest like ice. Fear. Aboard the Prometheus, Captain Sullivan watched the sensor readings with grim satisfaction. The shields were holding at 98% efficiency. The Dominion had just thrown everything they had at the vessel, and they'd accomplished exactly nothing. Shields holding, he reported to Admiral Brennan. No damage. Power consumption within acceptable parameters. Brennan nodded once. Good. Now it's our turn. Target the Dominion boring machines. I want every single one eliminated before they can reach those civilian shelters. Aye, ma'am. The Prometheus's secondary weapons systems, smaller guns scattered across his hull, swiveled to new targets. Not the Dominion fleet, which was still reeling from the ineffectiveness of their barrage, but the boring machines grinding their way through Vexar Prime's crust toward the shelters where millions cowered in darkness. Sullivan's fingers danced across his controls. Targeting solutions locked. Firing. Precision strikes lanced down from orbit, threading through Vexar Prime's atmosphere with surgical accuracy. Each boring machine was enormous, the size of a large building armored against conventional attacks and shielded against energy weapons. The Prometheus's weapons weren't conventional. The strikes were focused gravitational pulses, miniature singularities that existed for nanoseconds, but compressed matter with such force that molecular bonds simply ceased functioning. The boring machines didn't explode or melt or collapse. They imploded, crushed into spheres of superdense matter barely larger than a fist before the gravitational effect released, and they exploded outward in clouds of atomized debris. 17 boring machines, 17 threats to civilian lives, 17 targets eliminated in less than 10 seconds. In the deepest shelters, where the grinding of the machines had been audible through hundreds of meters of rock, sudden silence fell. Parents looked at each other with dawning hope. Children stopped crying. The Vexari had been minutes from death, and something had intervened. Someone had intervened. The Reaper squadrons hit the Dominion formation like wolves among sheep. Lieutenant Whitmore dove her fighter through a gap between two Dominion cruisers, her hands steady on the controls despite pulling 9Gs in the turn. Her targeting computer locked onto a Dominion weapons platform, and she triggered her antimatter torpedoes. The weapon streaked across the void and detonated against the platform's shields in a flash of mutual annihilation. Matter meeting antimatter in the most violent reaction known to physics. The platform's shields collapsed, and secondary explosions rippled through its structure. Splash 1 weapons platform, Whitmore reported, already vectoring toward her next target. Around her, her squadron moved with practiced coordination, each pilot covering another's approach, creating overlapping fields of fire that the Dominion struggled to counter. But the Dominion weren't helpless. They'd conquered 200 worlds. They knew how to fight. A plasma burst caught Reaper 12, Lieutenant Jason Garrett's fighter, dead center. The craft's shields held for a fraction of a second before failing, and then the superheated plasma core melted through the hull like a torch through paper. Garrett had time for one truncated scream before his fighter disintegrated. Reaper 12 is down, Whitmore reported, her voice flat despite the sick feeling in her stomach. Jason had been in her training class. They'd competed for top scores in the simulators. He'd been dating a girl back on Mars, planned to propose when they got home. Now he was an expanding cloud of ionized gas. Reaper 7, this is command. Admiral Brennan's voice came through steady and calm. Confirmed, continue your mission. Make his sacrifice count. Aye, ma'am. The battle devolved into chaos. 300 Reaper fighters against 200 Dominion warships, dancing through the void in a three-dimensional ballet of death. The Reapers were smaller, faster, more maneuverable. The Dominion ships were larger, tougher, more heavily armed. It should have been a massacre. It was, just not the way the Dominion expected. Human pilots performed maneuvers that seemed to violate physics. Micro-jumps that teleported them behind enemy vessels. Relativistic attack runs that used time dilation to their advantage. Coordinated strikes that exploited every weakness in Dominion shield technology. But they paid for every victory. Reaper 17 went down, then 23, then 41. Each loss was a human life, a pilot who'd trained for years, who had families and dreams and futures that ended in fire and vacuum. On the Prometheus bridge, Brennan watched the tactical display and kept her expression neutral. Inside, she felt each loss like a physical blow. These were her people, her responsibility. Every name that disappeared from the display was another ghost she'd carry for the rest of her life. But she couldn't show it, couldn't let the crew see doubt or grief or the crushing burden of command. They needed her to be steady, needed her to be certain, needed her to be the rock they could lean on when everything else was chaos. Reaper losses at 15%, the tactical officer reported. 45 fighters down, but we've eliminated 62 Dominion vessels and damaged another 43. Sullivan approached Brennan, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Admiral, the Dominion is starting to adapt. They're targeting our fighters more effectively. If this continues, we could lose half our squadrons before we achieve decisive advantage. Brennan nodded slowly. She'd known this moment would come. The moment when she'd have to make the choice that would define the battle. The choice that would cost lives but save more. The terrible mathematics of war that no amount of training could fully prepare you for. She thought about the Gulf War, about being shot down over Iraq, about 72 hours in the desert, watching Iraqi forces retreat while waiting for rescue, about the Shepherd family that had found her, given her water despite the risk, hidden her from patrols because they were fundamentally decent people caught in a war they didn't choose, about the promise she'd made to herself if she survived. Strength should protect, not destroy. Power should defend, not conquer. Recall Reaper squadrons to defensive positions around the Prometheus, she ordered, and charge the Nova cannon. It's time to end this. Sullivan's weathered face showed no surprise. He'd known it was coming too. Aye, ma'am, charging Nova cannon, ETA to full charge, 7 minutes. Make it 5, Captain. Those Reaper pilots are dying out there. Understood. The Nova cannon was humanity's answer to the question of what happens when you weaponize a miniature star. Sullivan had designed it 30 years ago, back when Earth's defensive strategy focused on quality over quantity. Build one weapon so powerful, so devastating, that potential enemies would think twice before attacking. The design was elegant in its brutality. 3 fusion reactors channeling their combined output into magnetic containment fields that compressed hydrogen to the point of stellar fusion, then releasing that fusion reaction in a directed beam using technology that still made physicists uncomfortable. It was, essentially, a miniature star fired like a bullet. The power requirements were astronomical. The heat generation was off the charts. The containment failure risk was never quite zero. And if anything went wrong during the firing sequence, the Prometheus and everything within 100,000 kilometers would be vaporized. Sullivan had argued against its deployment for years, had written reports explaining why the weapon was too dangerous, too unpredictable, too likely to cause catastrophic failures, had been overruled by people who understood that sometimes you needed a weapon so terrible that you'd never have to use it. Except now, they were using it. Fusion reactors at maximum output, Sullivan reported, watching his displays with the focused attention of a man who knew exactly how many things could go wrong. Magnetic containment holding steady, hydrogen compression at 70% and rising. The Dominion fleet was beginning to realize something was happening. The Prometheus's power output had spiked dramatically. Energy readings were climbing into ranges that suggested either a critical malfunction or weapon charging. Given that the shields remained stable, they were betting on the latter. Commander Vrax made a decision. All ships, concentrate fire on the human vessel. Whatever they're preparing, we cannot allow them to complete it. Full assault, ignore the fighters. Everything we have at that ship. 138 Dominion vessels, all that remained combat capable from the original 200, turned their full attention on the Prometheus. Every weapon, every bit of firepower they could muster, unleashed in a desperate attempt to overwhelm the dimensional shields before the humans could deploy whatever weapon they were charging. The space around the Prometheus became an inferno. Energy levels that would have made a star jealous. Kinetic impacts that released the energy of nuclear weapons. Plasma superheated to temperatures that shouldn't exist outside stellar cores. All of it hammering at the dimensional shields with relentless fury. The shields held, but barely. Shield efficiency dropping, Sullivan reported, his calm voice not quite hiding the tension beneath. 98%, 95, 91. The dimensional displacement is consuming more power than projected. Divert power from secondary systems, Brennan ordered. Life support to minimum. Artificial gravity to emergency levels only. Everything to shields and the Nova cannon. Aye, ma'am. Across the Prometheus, the lights dimmed. Gravity fluctuated as generators prioritized weapon systems over crew comfort. The temperature dropped as heating systems shut down to conserve power. In the corridors, crew members grabbed handholds as they suddenly weighed 20% less than normal. On the bridge, Brennan felt the deck shift beneath her feet as gravity adjusted. She maintained her stance through habit and long practice, watching the countdown on the Nova cannon charge cycle. 3 minutes. Shield efficiency at 87%, Sullivan reported. If they maintain this bombardment intensity, we'll have shield failure in approximately 8 minutes. The cannon fires in 3, Brennan said. We don't need 8. 2 minutes. Lieutenant Whitmore and her squadron had pulled back to defensive positions around the Prometheus, creating a screen of fighters between the capital ship and the Dominion fleet. She watched her shield strength dropping as near-miss plasma bursts washed over her Reaper with superheated fury. "Command, this is Reaper 7, she transmitted. We're taking heavy fire out here. Whatever you're planning, now would be a great time. Hold position, Reaper 7, Brennan's voice came back. 1 minute, 40 seconds. Make it count. Whitmore gritted her teeth and dove her fighter toward the Dominion cruiser that was lining up a shot on the Prometheus. She triggered her mass drivers, sending depleted uranium slugs downrange at relativistic speeds. The projectiles slammed into the cruiser's weapon ports, not destroying them, but disrupting their targeting long enough to matter. A plasma burst caught her wing. Alarm screamed as her shields collapsed and armor plating began to melt. She rolled away, venting atmosphere from a hull breach, watching her life support readings plummet. Reaper 7 taking damage, she reported, her voice steady despite knowing she had maybe 30 seconds of air left. Shields down, hull breach, I'm not going to make it back. 1 minute. On the Prometheus bridge, Brennan heard the transmission and felt something twist in her chest. 24 years old. Rebecca Whitmore had a degree in astrophysics from MIT, had written a thesis on gravitational lensing effects, had wanted to explore the galaxy after her service term ended. Now she was dying in a crippled fighter, still doing her duty. Reaper 7, Brennan said quietly. Your sacrifice will be remembered. Thank you for giving us the time we needed. Happy to help, ma'am, Whitmore replied, and her voice carried a strange calm despite the hypoxia that was making her vision tunnel. Give them hell for me. 30 seconds. The Nova cannon reached full charge. Captain Sullivan's hands moved across the firing controls with the precision of a surgeon, making final adjustments to the targeting solution. The Dominion fleet had obligingly bunched up in their concentrated assault, forming a dense formation that was tactically sound for overwhelming a single target. It was also perfect for what came next. Nova cannon charged and ready, Sullivan reported. Firing solution locked on Dominion fleet center mass. Magnetic containment at maximum. All safeties disengaged. Brennan looked at the tactical display one last time. 138 Dominion ships. Crews totaling perhaps 70,000 beings. Most of them probably didn't want to be here, didn't choose to serve in a genocidal empire, were just following orders like soldiers everywhere throughout history. But they'd made their choice when they started poisoning a world, when they'd aimed boring machines at shelters full of children, when they'd broadcast their conquest as entertainment and intimidation. She thought about Lieutenant Whitmore, choking on vacuum while her oxygen ran out, about the 44 other Reaper pilots who died buying time for this moment, about the 8 million Vexari who would live because someone finally said enough. Fire, Admiral Catherine Brennan ordered, and the Prometheus unleashed hell itself. The Nova cannon fired. For 12 seconds, the void between stars became something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist outside the core of a dying sun. The beam wasn't a laser or a particle stream or any conventional weapon that the Dominion had encountered in 2 centuries of conquest. It was directed stellar fusion, a column of nuclear fire contained by magnetic fields that would have made gods weep. The beam carved through space at nearly the speed of light, and everything it touched simply ceased to be. The first Dominion cruiser in the firing path didn't explode. It didn't shatter or melt or burn. It was there one moment, 800 meters of advanced warship with a crew of 3,000 souls. Then the beam touched it, and molecular bonds unraveled. Atoms were stripped to their component quarks. Those quarks were torn apart by energies that physics said shouldn't exist outside the Big Bang itself. The ship became light, then not even that, just an absence where matter used to be. The beam continued, unstoppable, carving through the Dominion formation like a blade of pure starlight. Warships that had been considered state-of-the-art, that had conquered worlds and broken civilizations, simply evaporated in its path. 78 vessels touched by the beam. 78 holes punched through the formation where death moved faster than consciousness could register. In 12 seconds, nearly 50,000 Dominion crew members died. Most never knew it happened. Their neural systems couldn't process information fast enough to register the light that killed them. They were alive, and then they weren't, with no moment of transition between. On the bridge of the inexorable might, Commander Vrax watched his tactical display dissolve into chaos. 60% of his fleet simply gone, not destroyed in any conventional sense. Erased, deleted from reality like a child wiping marks from a slate. His hands, all four of them, trembled as he stared at the empty spaces where his ships had been, where crews he'd served with, officers he'd trained, soldiers who'd followed his orders had existed moments ago. "Sir," his tactical officer whispered, the young Dominion's voice breaking. What do we do?" Vrax had fought in 37 campaigns, had commanded fleets in battles against species that refused subjugation, had won victories that would be studied in military academies for generations. But he'd never faced anything like this. Never imagined anything like this could exist. The humans had built a weapon that violated every rule of civilized warfare. That exceeded the bounds of reasonable force. That treated war not as politics by other means, but as an opportunity to demonstrate technological supremacy so overwhelming that resistance became meaningless. "Retreat," Vrax ordered, his voice hollow. "All ships, emergency FTL, gather pattern. Don't group up. Just get out of here." "Sir, what about the ground forces? The conquest?" Vrax looked at his officer, and in his metallic eyes was something the young soldier had never seen before. Absolute existential terror. "Leave them. Leave everything. If we stay, we die. That ship." He gestured at the Prometheus on his display, still hanging in space like a monument to human fury. "That ship could kill us all before our FTL drives finish charging. We're leaving. Now." The remaining Dominion vessels, 60 ships from the original 200, broke formation and fled. Some jumped to FTL immediately, risking dangerous blind jumps rather than spend the time for proper calculations. Others scattered on conventional drives, heading for the system's edges where they could safely engage faster than light travel. The inexorable Might was among the first to jump, its FTL drive tearing open a wound in space that swallowed the flagship in a flash of twisted light. Before he left, Vrax transmitted one final message to Dominion High Command on an emergency channel. "Command, this is Fleet Commander Vrax. The conquest of Vexar Prime has failed catastrophically. The humans have intervened with weapons that violate every known principle of warfare. They have a single vessel that eliminated 60% of my fleet in seconds." His voice cracked slightly. "Do not provoke the humans. Do not challenge them. Do not give them any reason to deploy that ship against our worlds. They are what we always feared existed somewhere in the galaxy. A species so advanced, so ruthless, so willing to embrace apocalyptic force that resistance is meaningless." He paused, collecting himself. "Mark human space as absolute exclusion territory. Any ship that enters it does so with the understanding that they may face total annihilation. Vrax out." The transmission ended, and the inexorable Might vanished into the darkness between stars. Aboard the Prometheus, Admiral Catherine Brennan stood on the bridge and watched the Dominion fleet scatter like frightened animals. Around her, the command crew maintained their posts with professional discipline, but she could see the shock in their faces, the understanding of what they'd just unleashed, what they'd become. "Dominion fleet is retreating," the tactical officer reported. 60 vessels remain. All are heading for FTL jump points or system edges. They're running. "Let them go," Brennan ordered quietly. "We came here to save the Vexari, not to exterminate every Dominion soldier in the sector. They've learned their lesson." Captain Sullivan approached, his weathered face drawn. At 68, he'd seen enough war to know what they'd just done, what it meant, what it would cost them in the long years ahead. "Admiral, Reaper squadrons are requesting permission to return to hangar bays. We lost 45 fighters total. Some pilots are reporting critical damage and low life support." Brennan closed her eyes briefly. 45. 45 young men and women who'd trusted her command, who'd believed in the mission, who died buying time for the Nova cannon to charge. Permission granted, and Captain, she opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. Prepare a memorial service. I want every name read, every sacrifice acknowledged. They bought peace for 8 million civilians. That matters. Aye, ma'am. The bridge lights came back to full strength as power was redirected from weapons to standard systems. Gravity stabilized. The temperature began rising as environmental controls reactivated. The Prometheus settled from battle readiness to normal operations, but everyone aboard knew that nothing would ever be quite normal again. In the Vexari command bunker, absolute silence had fallen when the Nova cannon fired. Every Vexari in the command center had watched their displays with a mixture of awe and horror as 78 Dominion ships simply ceased to exist, as a weapon beyond their comprehension had rewritten the rules of warfare in 12 seconds. Ambassador Krell found his voice first. By all the ancestors and gods, what did we just witness? Commander Zelk, normally so composed, so military in his bearing, sat down heavily in his chair. His scales had shifted to a color that indicated profound shock among the Vexari. That wasn't a battle, that was extinction-level force deployed with surgical precision. If the humans had aimed that weapon at our planet instead of the Dominion fleet, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Everyone in the bunker understood. The humans could have destroyed Vexar Prime as easily as they destroyed those ships, could have burned the planet to bedrock with that weapon. Instead, they'd used it to save 8 million Vexari civilians from a genocidal empire. The implication was staggering. Ambassador Krell, the communication officer called out, incoming transmission from the Prometheus. Admiral Brennan is requesting a channel. Put her through immediately. The screen activated and Admiral Brennan appeared. She looked tired, Krell thought. The kind of tired that came from making decisions that cost lives, from carrying burdens that couldn't be shared. But her eyes were steady, her voice calm. Ambassador Krell, we've eliminated the immediate threat. The Dominion fleet has retreated. All atmospheric processors have been destroyed, and the boring machines are no longer a threat to your civilian shelters. Vexar Prime is secure. Admiral, Krell struggled to find words adequate to the moment. What you've done, there are no words in any language I know. You saved our entire species. 8 million lives that would have been lost. You asked for help, Ambassador. You didn't demand. You didn't try to manipulate or threaten. You simply asked, admitting you had nothing to offer but gratitude. Brennan's expression softened slightly. Do you know how rare that is in this galaxy? Honest desperation combined with genuine humility. Most species we've encountered either try to bargain from positions of false strength or approach us as if we owe them assistance simply for existing. She paused, and something harder entered her voice. But I need to be honest with you about what just happened here. We didn't just save your people. We made a statement to every species in this sector. The Dominion will broadcast what we did. They'll share footage of their fleet being destroyed. Within days, every civilization in known space will know that Earth possesses weapons capable of fleet-scale annihilation. Is that a bad thing? Krell asked. Surely such power will make them think twice before attacking others. Perhaps, Brennan acknowledged, or perhaps it will make them fear us. Fear makes people do irrational things, Ambassador. Some will seek alliances with us for protection. Others will band together against us as a perceived threat. The galaxy's balance of power just shifted dramatically, and we can't predict all the consequences. Zelk spoke up. Admiral, with respect, the Dominion has conquered 200 worlds. They've committed genocide on a scale that makes our minds reel. If your actions stop them from doing it to a 201st world, isn't that worth the political complications? Brennan smiled, and it was a genuine expression. Commander, I think you and I would get along well. Yes, it's worth it. We'd make the same choice again. I just wanted you to understand that this victory comes with consequences that extend beyond Vexar Prime. We understand, Admiral, Krell said, and we accept those consequences gladly. When can your medical teams begin assisting with our wounded? The Dominion's bombardment has left us with millions in need of care. Medical frigates will be in orbit within the hour. They're equipped to handle mass casualty situations. We'll also be sending engineering teams to help repair your infrastructure. But first, Brennan's expression became more somber. First, I need to honor our own fallen. 45 pilots died in the battle. They deserve recognition before we move on to the next crisis. In the Prometheus's main hangar bay, 255 Reaper pilots stood in formation. Behind them, the surviving fighters sat in their docking cradles, scorched and damaged from combat. The massive space had been cleared, and in the center, holographic projectors displayed the names and faces of the 45 who hadn't returned. Admiral Brennan stood before them, still in her combat uniform, her steel-gray hair catching the hangar lights. Captain Sullivan stood to her right. To her left, the Prometheus's chaplain held a tablet with the names. The assembled crew came to attention as Brennan approached the memorial display. For a long moment, she simply looked at the faces. Young men and women, most in their 20s, who'd trusted her command, who'd flown into battle knowing they might not return, who'd bought time with their lives so the Nova cannon could fire. Lieutenant Rebecca Whitmore, Brennan began, her voice carrying across the hangar through speakers. 24 years old, astrophysics degree from MIT, survived by parents in Boston and a sister in Chicago. Killed in action defending the Prometheus, protecting 8 million civilians she'd never met and never would. She moved to the next name. Lieutenant Jason Garrett, 22 years old, engineering background, engaged to be married, died providing cover fire for damaged wingmen, ensuring they made it back when he couldn't. Name after name, face after face, story after story, 45 lives that had ended in fire and vacuum, 45 futures erased, 45 families that would receive notifications and folded flags in the thanks of a grateful civilization that could never truly understand what had been lost. When Brennan reached the final name, her voice was hoarse with emotion she'd kept tightly controlled for the past hour. Ensign Marcus Webb, 20 years old, fresh from academy, first combat mission. Last transmission was a warning to his squadron about incoming fire, saving 6 other pilots. She paused, looking at Webb's young face on the display, a kid who should have been in college, not dying in space. Survived by a mother in Denver who lost her husband in the Centauri campaign 5 years ago. Marcus was all she had left. Brennan stepped back, her eyes sweeping across the assembled pilots. She saw them struggling with their own grief, their own survivor's guilt, their own questions about why they'd made it back when others hadn't. These 45 gave everything, she said. They died so that strangers on a world they'd never visited could breathe free air, so that children they'd never meet could grow up instead of suffocating in the dark, so that a species facing genocide could survive. She straightened, her voice gaining strength. That's what humans do. When we see innocent people threatened by genocidal empires, by those who would crush the weak simply because they can, we intervene, not for profit, not for conquest, not for political advantage. We intervene because it's right, because if we don't, who will? Brennan looked at the faces in the memorial display one more time. These 45 understood that. They chose to serve knowing the risks, knowing that the mission might demand everything from them. And when that moment came, they didn't hesitate. They didn't run. They did their duty with courage and skill and sacrifice that honored everyone who's ever worn the uniform. She raised her hand in salute, and every person in the hangar bay did the same. 255 pilots, dozens of ground crew, Captain Sullivan with tears streaming down his weathered face, all saluting the dead who'd bought victory with their lives. We will remember every face, every sacrifice, Brennan said quietly. We'll honor them by being worthy of what they gave us, by making sure that what they bought with their lives, peace, safety, the survival of innocence, endures. She lowered her hand. Dismissed. The formation broke, but nobody left immediately. Pilots approached the memorial display, touching the holographic images of friends and squadron mates. Some cried openly, others stood in silent contemplation. All of them understood that they'd been part of something significant, something that would be remembered and studied and debated for generations. Brennan found Lieutenant Maria Santos, the senior surviving Reaper pilot, standing before Lieutenant Whitmore's image. Santos was 31, a veteran of 2 campaigns, steady and competent and quietly devastated by the losses. She saved my life, Santos said without preamble. 2 weeks ago in training, I screwed up a maneuver, nearly crashed into an asteroid. She pushed my fighter clear with her own shields. Damaged her craft to save mine. She was a good pilot, Brennan acknowledged. One of the best. She wanted to explore the galaxy after her service term ended, talk about studying gravitational anomalies near black holes, make first contact with species nobody had met yet. Santos's voice was thick with grief. She had so many plans, Admiral. So much she wanted to do. I know. Brennan put a hand on the pilot's shoulder. And I'm sorry. Sorrier than I can express. But Santos, listen to me. Because of Rebecca and the others, 8 million Vexari children will grow up. Will have their own dreams, their own plans. Rebecca's future ended, but she made millions of futures possible. Santos nodded, not trusting her voice. Take some time, Brennan said gently. Grieve, remember. Honor them through your actions. Then get back to living, because that's what they'd want. That's what they died for. In Admiral Brennan's private quarters 2 hours later, Captain Sullivan found her sitting in the dark, staring at a tablet that displayed the full casualty report. 45 pilots dead, 12 ground crew killed when a Dominion shot penetrated the weakened shields during the Nova cannon's charging sequence. 83 wounded, some critically. You should get some rest, Admiral, Sullivan said, not bothering with formalities in private. They'd known each other too long for that. I will, Brennan replied, not looking up. After I finish reading every after-action report, after I draft personal letters to every family, after I'm Catherine. Sullivan used her first name deliberately, something he only did in private when he needed her to hear him as a friend, not as her subordinate officer. You can't carry all of this alone. Command is a burden, yes, but you have to let others help share the weight. They were my responsibility, Ezra, every single one of them. I gave the orders that sent them into combat. I made the tactical decisions that determined who lived and who died. Leadership demands that I carry this weight. Sullivan sat down across from her. You also made the decision to save 8 million civilians, to stop a genocidal empire, to intervene when nobody else would. Those decisions matter too. Do they balance out? Brennan asked, and her voice was raw with emotion she'd kept locked down during the memorial service. 45 dead on my orders. Can I really say their sacrifice was worth it? How do I quantify that? You can't, Sullivan said bluntly. That's the cost of wielding such force, Catherine. There's no equation that balances lives. No calculation that makes the decision easier. You just have to trust that you made the best choice you could with the information you had for the right reasons. And did I? Sullivan was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. I watched you hesitate before ordering the Nova cannon to fire. Watched you choose to act despite knowing what it would mean for our pilots. You didn't make that decision lightly or callously. You made it because the alternative, letting 8 million civilians die when we could prevent it, was worse. He leaned forward. That's what leadership is, Catherine. Not making easy choices, but making necessary ones. Carrying this burden so others don't have to. And yes, it's heavy. Yes, it costs you pieces of your soul, but someone has to do it. Brennan finally looked up, and Sullivan could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of command that aged people beyond their years. I need to tell you something, she said quietly, something classified that only a handful of people know. Sullivan waited. The Prometheus isn't unique. Over the past 10 years, Earth has been building a defensive fleet in secret. 12 Prometheus-class vessels total, stationed at Mars, Titan, Europa, and other strategic positions. This mission, Operation Thunderstrike, wasn't just about saving Vexar Prime. Understanding dawned on Sullivan's face. It was a demonstration, a message to the Dominion and every other potential threat. We needed them to see what one Prometheus could do, to understand the price of attacking Earth or our allies. The Dominion will think this ship is our most advanced vessel, our greatest weapon. They don't know about the other 11. Brennan's voice was flat, emotionless. I used Vexar's suffering, used our pilots' lives, used this entire battle as a strategic demonstration to buy Earth security through intimidation. And you hate yourself for it, Sullivan observed. Shouldn't I? I manipulated a desperate species plea for help into a military propaganda opportunity, turned genuine suffering into a strategic advantage. Sullivan considered this. Did you save 8 million Vexari? Yes. Did you stop the Dominion from attacking others? Probably. Did you establish Earth as a power that won't tolerate genocide in our neighborhood? Yes. Then maybe, Sullivan said carefully, the fact that you accomplished multiple objectives simultaneously doesn't diminish the primary one. You saved those people, Catherine. The strategic benefits don't erase that. They're just additional outcomes. Brennan wanted to believe him, wanted to accept that the ends justified the means, that the greater good balanced the moral complexity of using genuine suffering for strategic advantage. But she'd been in command too long, made too many hard choices, carried too many burdens to accept easy absolution. I will remember every face, every sacrifice, she said, and I'll carry the knowledge that I use Vexar's pain for Earth's benefit. Those are my weights to bear, Ezra. Mine alone. Then bear them, Sullivan said, standing. But don't let them crush you, because Earth needs you, Catherine. Needs your willingness to make the hard choices. Needs your strength to carry the burdens that come with them. The galaxy is about to become much more complicated, and we need our best admiral ready to face it. He moved toward the door, then paused. Get some rest. Draft your letters tomorrow. The families deserve your best words, not ones written when you're this exhausted. After he left, Brennan sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about sacrifice and strategy, about means and ends, about the terrible price of peace bought with violence. On Vexar Prime, dawn broke over a world that had been minutes from death less than 12 hours ago. In the shelters, 8 million Vexari emerged into air that was finally, blessedly breathable again. Parents held children and wept with relief. The elderly offered prayers of gratitude to gods that had answered through the most unlikely messengers imaginable. Human medical teams worked alongside Vexari doctors in improvised field hospitals, treating wounds from the bombardment. Human engineers studied the damage to infrastructure, planning reconstruction. Human soldiers stood guard over supply distribution points, ensuring order while the Vexari government reorganized. Ambassador Krell walked through the ruins of his capital city with Admiral Brennan beside him. The destruction was catastrophic. Entire districts reduced to rubble. Government buildings collapsed. Monuments that had stood for millennia, now just debris. But alive. The city was alive. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Children played in the streets despite their parents' worried supervision. Merchants were already setting up temporary stalls because life demanded to continue even in the aftermath of apocalypse. We will rebuild, Krell said, looking at the devastation. It will take years, decades perhaps, but we will rebuild. Earth will help, Brennan replied. Materials, expertise, whatever you need. We don't intervene and then abandon. We see things through. Why? Krell asked, turning to face her. I understand military alliances, political calculations, strategic advantage, but the resources you're committing to our recovery far exceed any rational return on investment. Why do you truly do this? Brennan was quiet for a moment, watching a group of Vexari children playing with a ball someone had scavenged from the ruins. Despite everything they'd experienced, they were still capable of joy, still able to play and laugh and be children. Because someone has to, she said finally. The galaxy is full of species who talk about morality and ethics and the value of sentient life. But when it comes time to act, when it requires real sacrifice and risk, most of them find reasons why it's someone else's problem. She looked at Krell directly. Earth decided we wouldn't be those people. When we see innocent beings threatened by genocidal empires, we intervene. Not because it's profitable or strategically optimal or politically convenient. We intervene because it's right. Because if we don't, who will? You make it sound simple. It's not simple at all, Brennan admitted. It's complicated and messy and costs us resources and lives, and sometimes keeps me awake at night wondering if we're doing the right thing. But the alternative, standing by while 8 million civilians die because helping them isn't in our immediate interest, that would cost us something more valuable than resources or lives. What's that? Our humanity, Brennan said. The ability to look at ourselves in the mirror and recognize who we see. We'd rather be the species that fights genocidal empires than the species that watches them work and does nothing. Krell's scales rippled with an emotion that translated roughly to profound respect. The galaxy doesn't understand you yet, Admiral, but they will. And some will love you for what you've done here. Others will fear you. Many will do both simultaneously. I know, Brennan said. We're prepared for that. They walked in silence for a while through streets where Vexari citizens were beginning the long process of rebuilding their lives. Finally, they reached a plaza where a hastily erected monument stood. Just a simple stone pillar with names carved into it. The 45 Reaper pilots who died in the battle. We wanted to honor them, Krell explained. Your people who gave their lives for ours. It's temporary. We'll create something more permanent when we've rebuilt. But we needed to acknowledge their sacrifice now. Needed our children to know the names of those who saved them. Brennan read the names, her throat tight with emotion. Rebecca Whitmore, Jason Garrett, Marcus Webb. All 45, carved in stone on a world they'd never visited, honored by a species they'd died to protect. Thank you, she managed to say. This means more than you know. It's the least we can do. Krell placed one clawed hand on the monument. These names will be remembered on Vexar Prime for as long as our species exists. We will tell our children, and they will tell theirs, about the day the humans came, about the warriors who bought our survival with their blood. Brennan stood before the monument for a long time, thinking about sacrifice and memory, about the cost of peace and the burden of command, thinking about 45 futures that had ended so millions could begin. On the observation deck's memorial wall aboard the Prometheus, a new addition had appeared. Lieutenant Rebecca Whitmore's name, first among the 45, with a small notation beneath. Wanted to explore the galaxy. Instead, she saved 8 million who will explore it for her. Brennan had added it herself in the quiet hours after the battle. A personal reminder that every number in her casualty reports had been a person with dreams and futures. Rebecca had wanted to study black holes. Now her name would orbit Vexar Prime forever, a different kind of gravitational monument. She would have liked that, Brennan whispered to the stars. 1 week later, Admiral Brennan stood on the Prometheus's observation deck, watching Vexar Prime recede as the great ship prepared to return to Earth. The planet was still damaged, still scarred, but it was healing. Reconstruction was underway. Life was continuing. Captain Sullivan found her there, as she'd known he would. Final casualty report is complete, he said, handing her a tablet. 45 pilots, 12 crew members, 83 wounded, all expected to recover. Against that, 8 million Vexari civilians saved, Dominion threat to this sector eliminated, and Earth's reputation as a force willing to intervene established. The mathematics of war, Brennan said, not looking at the tablet. Numbers that represent people. Lives reduced to statistics. Also a message received when Dominion High Command, Sullivan added. Their emperor issued a formal decree 2 days ago. Human space is now classified as absolute exclusion territory. Any Dominion ship that enters it does so with the understanding that they may face total annihilation. We're officially recognized as an independent power not to be provoked. We bought peace through strength, Brennan observed, through overwhelming demonstration of force. Is that victory or just delayed conflict? Maybe it's both, Sullivan suggested. Maybe that's all war ever achieves, postponing the next war through credible threat of consequences. Not ideal, but better than the alternative. Brennan finally looked at him. 12 Prometheus-class vessels, Ezra. 12 ships capable of fleet-scale annihilation. What does that make us? Peacekeepers or potential tyrants? That depends on how we use them, on whether we remember why we built them in the first place. Sullivan gestured at the receding planet. We built them to protect, to intervene when others wouldn't, to be the force that stops genocides rather than enables them. As long as we remember that, as long as we keep our moral compass, we're peacekeepers. And if we forget, then we become what we fought against, Sullivan acknowledged. But Catherine, I've served with you for 15 years. I've watched you agonize over every difficult decision, carry the burden of every life lost under your command, refuse the easy path when the right one was harder. If anyone can be trusted with this kind of power, it's you. Brennan smiled slightly. That's a terrifying amount of faith to place in one person, Ezra. Good thing you're not one person then. You've got crew, advisors, chains of command, civilian oversight. The power belongs to Earth, not to you personally. You're just the one trusted to wield it responsibly. The observation deck speakers crackled. Admiral Brennan, this is the bridge. We're receiving a transmission from Earth. Admiral Dalton wants to congratulate you on the mission success. Put him through here, Brennan ordered. The wall screen activated, showing Admiral William Dalton in Earth's command center. Behind him, the command staff looked pleased, almost celebratory. Admiral Brennan, Dalton said, his gravelly voice carrying unmistakable satisfaction. Operation Thunderstrike has exceeded all projections. You've saved 8 million civilians, eliminated a major Dominion fleet, and established Earth as a power that cannot be ignored or threatened. The President wants to award you the Star of Valor, the highest military honor we can bestow. With respect, Admiral, the star should go to the 45 pilots who died. They're the ones who earned it. They'll all receive it posthumously, Dalton assured her. But you earned it too, Catherine. You made the hard calls, led humanity's first major intervention in galactic affairs, and did it with precision and moral clarity. Brennan thought about the letters she'd written to 45 families, about the monument on Vexar Prime, about the burden she'd carry for the rest of her life. I accept the honor on behalf of my crew, she said formally, but privately, Admiral, I want you to know that this victory cost us. I used desperate people's suffering as a strategic opportunity. I'll live with that knowledge forever. Dalton's expression became more somber. Command means making choices where every option has a price, Catherine. You chose to save 8 million lives. The fact that Earth also benefited strategically doesn't diminish that primary achievement. It just means you're good at your job. Maybe, Brennan said, or maybe I'm just good at justifying necessary evils. Those aren't mutually exclusive, Dalton replied. Welcome home, Admiral. Earth needs more officers willing to carry the burdens you've carried. The galaxy just became much more complicated, and we need our best people ready for what comes next. The transmission ended, leaving Brennan and Sullivan alone in the observation deck. What do you think comes next? Sullivan asked. Brennan looked at the stars, at the vast darkness between them, where hundreds of species lived and struggled and fought for survival, where genocidal empires crushed the weak and nobody intervened because it wasn't politically convenient or strategically optimal. More of this, she said, more desperate calls for help, more impossible choices. But we'll answer, every time, because that's the choice we make. Because if we only helped when it was easy or cheap or convenient, we'd be no different from the species who watched Vexar burn and did nothing. We're better than that. We have to be. Even knowing the cost? Especially knowing the cost, Brennan said. Because if we only helped when it was easy, we'd be abandoning the very humanity we're trying to protect. The Prometheus began its journey home, carrying an admiral who understood the burden of power, a crew that had proven their courage, and the memory of 45 who'd given everything so that millions could live. Behind them, on a world they'd saved from genocide, 8 million Vexari looked up at the stars and knew that somewhere out there humanity was watching, ready to intervene, willing to fight, prepared to be the monster that monsters feared. And across the galaxy, in command centers and throne rooms and war councils, species were learning a new truth. Earth had announced itself not with words or diplomacy, but with the complete annihilation of a fleet everyone had thought invincible. The age of human intervention had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same.